Hello everyone and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry. Today's video is a rare second impression on a new game mode, the Mercurial Gauntlet. I talked about earlier this week in a video that I was feeling left a bit disappointed with this new mode since it felt very monotonous, very static, and very samey to me to just play through the same quest 100 times. Even though we were told we'd get an easy and chill mode and not to expect much more than that, I felt like the actual gameplay mechanics were so stripped down that it wasn't really entertaining or really fun to actually take part in. Now, a lot of you rebuked this in the comments and gave your own take, which I found very helpful and very enlightening in some ways, that, hey, I am struggling with this, or, hey, this is actually a really cool sandbag, and I actually got to use it out that way a bit more and found that to be pretty enjoyable even at level 20. I also saw people doing cool things like solo clears of the level 20 Mercurial Gauntlet, which presented a fun challenge. So the tide of opinion started to shift for me, but then we got information yesterday that out of nowhere, seemingly, we would be getting levels 21 through level 40 of the Wind Gauntlet today. So that came out at reset, and this does change my perspective on the Gauntlet. And I have to say, I'm a lot more positive than I was initially. Perhaps I should have had more patience and just planned that our side games overlords would have this in mind and would have had a plan for what to do. It does seem a bit odd to me and a bit unceremonious how this new content was briefly announced and then released. It makes me think that maybe it was originally planned for later in the month. For instance, after we get our adventure upgrades at the end of June that were in What's Ahead Part 4. But I'll tell you why I enjoyed this a lot more, and basically it's because there's actually an element of strategy now. So although this is still a chill mode from a gameplay perspective, you actually get to enjoy the rich, basic mechanics of Dragalia Lost. Things like optimizing your combos, things like building a team that has some synergy, good co-abilities, assigning your worm prints in the right ways, assigning your dragons in the right ways. So there's a lot of depth and thought that you can put into the building side, even if the gameplay is straightforward. And when the damage that you need is as high as it is for some of these harder levels, even the gameplay side, you get to enjoy those things like optimizations that are not really happening when you're just auto-battling. So I found it to be a breath of fresh air compared to before. I found it to be a much more meaningful test of my skill. And maybe this is just what I wanted, is for it to actually scale in difficulty to where myself and other day one players are at right now. A lot of you have already cleared level 40 like I have, or cleared it before I did, using varying teams, varying degrees of power, varying elements. It's an open-ended challenge, and it's not just one team or just pay to win by any means. I didn't use any 5-star max unbound dragons on my team from the gacha pool. I used a max unbound 4-star dragon and then partially unbound dragons and a welfare dragon, Pele. Apparently Pele is pretty good for this if you transform into her, because sometimes she'll hit the boss an extra number of times, like 4 times the normal amount. But all of that said, I'll fast forward through my earlier levels here and then focus in on some of the harder ones, in particular the final level. I did find that I was having to tweak my strategy, having to revisit and rethink and shift around my worm prints, change in and out characters, and maybe this is what some of you guys were getting at level 20 that made it pretty entertaining and made it feel like a good benchmark of progress. For me, that definitely came at these later levels, from 35 to 40. I got that same feeling as when I first played the game, didn't have all the resources I needed, and was trying to scrape by for something like the game's first epithet. So in that sense, I'm very pleased with the change, and this, to me, feels like a genuine long-term goal. It actually gives me a reason to engage with the game. It gives me a reason to summon, because I can think, hey, that student Maribel, who before I didn't really need for anything, well, maybe she could power up my Flame Gauntlet team. Maybe I actually want to summon now, because those characters could actually make a difference for me. So just having harder content helps me engage with the game. Besides that, I will say the rewards for this are also pretty absurd. They're really good. You can get 4 Damascus crystals, 4 golden fragments, 3 sunlight ores, and a sunlight stone, which is a free unbind on any 5-star dragon of your choice. You can use that unbind from one of your stronger elements to try to build up your weaker element teams and clear the gauntlet in those elements. So I'm not sure how they plan to roll this out yet. Maybe they'll add 20 levels like this every month of a different element. That will be kind of the focus that month. But you do have until the 15th to try to increase your Victor's Trove, clear any of levels 21 to 40 that you can, if you haven't already been able to do so by the time I'm posting this video. You're not going to get any more Twinkling Sand from your Victor's Trove by doing those extra levels, but you are going to get mana, rupees, and Eldwater for doing that. So there is actually still some benefit to complete all of the levels currently available in the Mercurial Gauntlet. As far as tips go for taking on the Gauntlet, especially these harder levels, one of the universals for me, it seems, has been to use Elisanne as a helper. She is an amazing helper with 20% extra strength for 15 seconds. When you consider her innate buff time ability, and using a buff time Wyrmprint like Bellathorna or the Halidom Brooms on her, or both for the maximum possible buff time, she is absolutely fantastic for this, considering the mode only lasts 60 seconds, and when you count in all those buff time bonuses, you can easily have perfect uptime 100% of the time in the match. You will have a strength buff from her that applies to your entire team. So she is basically the best helper for this. Second best would be Melody, because Melody can also increase team strength, but only by 15%, so that's why she's not quite as good as Elisanne, and she doesn't have a buff time passive like Elisanne does, so this is a good time to promote and set your Elisanne. Level 3 is when her skill buffs by 20%, and she does need to be a 5-star to unlock that, so do be aware of that, but she's a fantastic unit for Brunhilde's trial, so it's not like a waste to promote her necessarily if you plan to use her there. So that's one tip, but besides that, a lot of it is trial and error, and also there is some amount of RNG. I was using Sanoa on my team, and when I was finally able to clear level 40, I ran really lucky. I got 2 critical rate buffs and never hit a defense or an HP buff. I also got lucky in that one of Roy's claps was a high enough roll that it actually put my Marth into range for his last boost ability to kick in and activate my skills. So if that had not happened, I probably wouldn't have had the DPS to clear, because I did it with just a 2-second margin. My flame team isn't my strongest, and this gives me reason to actually power it up, but it was still possible to do, which I appreciate. It's not completely insurmountable, even if you are far from it now. If you slowly build up your team over time, max out your flame altars, proactively invest into your units, it should be possible to do. And there are a lot of ways to do it too. You can stack debuffs, which I didn't do. You can try to get lucky with Sanoa and roll some really good buffs for your team. Some of the universal things seem to be having a blade with a co-ability of strength. Having a wand seems to be very popular with that skill damage co-ability. Having your strong dragon on your leader so that when you do shapeshift, you're able to deal as much damage as possible. And typically, you'll only get 1 dragon transformation and 1 break within 60 seconds, with Golemim being able to squeeze in a second transformation. Another big tip is to be aware of when Roy claps his hands and sends a shockwave out across the entire arena. By casting a skill at that time or using your helper skill, you can protect your entire team with that iframe, and that is pretty important to make sure your team survives and is able to deal out the damage necessary to eventually take down the Fafnir. Really, I think that a lot of options are available to you. There are people who are using Bleed. There are people who have cleared this with 4 stars, multiple 4-star units who are not promoted. So I'm glad that it's not just, oh, have the strongest dragons, have the strongest adventurers. That will work for you, but you can clear this with Yudin. You can clear this with Elisanne on your team, even though she's of the weak element against this, just because she can buff the rest of your teammates. And if you only have one really strong flame character, you could try use her that way to power up and be a battery for that one character who's carrying the majority of your DPS. So yeah, you can probably tell by my tone and what I'm talking about that I really found a lot of enjoyment in the mode after this change was made. Maybe it was just too easy at first, and now it pushes me to a point that I actually have to think and actually have to strategize, and that hits the sweet spot for me that it's not impossible, but it feels more like content. It feels more like actual gameplay, and I get a lot of enjoyment out of it. So I'm actually looking forward now to what Mercurial Gauntlet has next. I miss this feeling from the beginning of the game of just being totally outclassed by the enemy and having to try scrape by as a free-to-play player. Anyway though, that's pretty much going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I'd love to hear what your impressions are on this harder content. Are you unhappy with it at all? Does it give you something to strive for? Do you feel like it's a bit unfair? It's too hard? I'm very curious to hear your take, so let me know in the comments below. I am still going to make a review video with builds and analysis for the new adventurers as the information about them slowly gets revealed on the wiki, so do look forward to that. That'll come out this weekend or on Monday. But otherwise, everyone, thank you once again for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time.
ルーエンは強くなったわ。